Have you ever felt like you belong nowhere? Caught between two worlds that both reject you for the same reason? That was Hannah Kim's reality every single day in Los Angeles, where her brilliant blue eyes made her too foreign for Americans and too strange for Koreans. The fluorescent lights of the Hanbok Cultural Center buzzed overhead as Hannah packed up her translation materials for the night. At 25, she had mastered both Korean and English with the fluency that came from necessity, not choice. Her mother had been American, her father Korean, and their early deaths had left her navigating both cultures alone. The traditional Korean dresses displayed around the center seemed to mock her as she gathered her papers. Beautiful, authentic, belonging. Everything she was not. She caught her reflection in the darkened window and sighed. The same blue eyes that had gotten her teased mercilessly in Korean school stared back at her. Too Western, the other children had whispered. Half-breed. Some had been cruel enough to say aloud. In American spaces, her Korean features marked her as foreign despite her perfect English. She existed in the spaces between, never fully accepted anywhere. The pay from tonight's translation work would barely cover rent on her studio apartment, but it was honest work. She specialized in legal documents and business contracts, helping Korean immigrants navigate American bureaucracy. It was meaningful, even if it didn't pay well. Most days, she told herself that was enough. Hannah locked up the cultural center and stepped into the humid Los Angeles evening. Koreatown buzzed with late-night energy despite the hour approaching midnight. Neon signs advertised karaoke bars and barbecue restaurants in both Korean and English. The familiar scent of kimchi and grilled meat drifted from nearby establishments, mixing with car exhaust and the distant smell of the ocean. She had parked 3 blocks away to save on meter fees, a necessity that now felt foolish in the darkened streets. Her sensible flats clicked against concrete as she hurried past closed storefronts and dimly lit alleys. This neighborhood was generally safe, but late nights always carried risk. The sound of raised voices made her pause. Korean, spoken fast and angry. She should keep walking, mind her own business, get to her car safely. But curiosity had always been her weakness, and the words being shouted were threats. Serious ones. Hannah crept closer to the alley mouth, staying in the shadows. 3 men in expensive suits surrounded a 4th man who was on his knees, blood trickling from his nose. The standing men had the controlled violence of professionals, their movements precise and threatening. "You thought you could skim from us," one of them said in Korean. "Did you think we wouldn't notice?" The kneeling man pleaded for mercy, explaining about sick children and mounting debts. Standard desperation, but his fear was real. Hannah's heart raced as she recognized the dynamic. This was organized crime, the kind her father had warned her to avoid. The kind that controlled more of Koreatown than most people realized. She started to back away when her purse strap caught on a metal trash can. The clang echoed through the alley like a gunshot. All 4 men turned toward her hiding spot. Run, her mind screamed, but her legs felt frozen. The 3 standing men moved toward her with purposeful strides, and she finally found the ability to move. She turned and sprinted toward the street, her flats slapping against concrete. Behind her, she heard rapid Korean and the sound of pursuit. Her breath came in sharp gasps as she rounded the corner onto the main street, hoping the lights and potential witnesses would provide safety. Instead, she nearly collided with another man emerging from a sleek black sedan. He was tall, probably 6 feet, with the kind of presence that commanded attention even in casual clothes. His dark hair was styled perfectly despite the late hour, and his suit looked like it cost more than she made in 3 months. When he looked up from his phone to see her panicked face, his expression shifted from mild annoyance to sharp focus. "Are you hurt?" he asked in accented English, his hands moving to steady her automatically. Hannah looked into his face and felt her breath catch for an entirely different reason. He was handsome in the way that made her forget how to form words, with strong features and intelligent dark eyes that seemed to see everything. But it was his instant protective stance and the way he positioned himself between her and the alley that made her trust him instinctively. "There are men," she started in Korean, then switched to English. "In the alley. They were hurting someone, and they saw me." His expression hardened, and he spoke rapidly in Korean to someone behind him. 2 other men appeared from the sedan, moving with the same controlled grace she had noticed in the alley. But these men felt different. Protective rather than predatory. The original three pursuers emerged from the alley and stopped short when they saw the new group. A tense conversation in rapid Korean followed, too fast for Hannah to catch all the details. But she understood enough. Territory. Respect. Boundaries crossed. Her rescuer spoke with quiet authority, and the three men bowed slightly before retreating. The entire confrontation lasted less than 2 minutes, but the power dynamic was clear. This man held more influence than the others, and they respected it. "You are safe now," he said, turning back to her with a slight smile that transformed his serious features. "I am Jean Woo." "Hannah Kim," she replied automatically, then wondered if giving her real name was wise. Jean Woo's eyes widened slightly as he looked at her properly for the first time. She watched his gaze travel over her features, lingering on her eyes with an expression she couldn't interpret. Surprise? Recognition? Something that looked almost like awe. "Your eyes," he said softly in Korean. "They are remarkable." Hannah felt heat rise in her cheeks. Usually comments about her eyes came with judgment or curiosity that made her uncomfortable. But the way Jean Woo said it sounded like a compliment, even reverent. "They have caused me nothing but trouble," she replied honestly. "Then those people were fools," Jean Woo said with such conviction that she almost believed him. In Korean folklore, blue eyes bring extraordinary luck. "You are Chongun." A blessing. No one had ever called her a blessing before. The words settled into spaces in her heart she hadn't realized were empty. But the rational part of her mind wondered why this powerful stranger was being so kind to someone he had just met. "Those men will not bother you again," Jean Woo continued. "But it is not safe for you to be alone here at this hour. May I drive you home?" Every safety lesson she had ever learned screamed against getting into a car with a stranger. But the alternative was walking alone through streets where she had just witnessed violence. And something about Jean Woo felt solid and trustworthy. Besides, he had just made her problems disappear with a few words. "I do not want to impose," she said carefully. "It would be my honor," Jean Woo replied, and somehow she believed him. As he opened the passenger door of the sedan for her, Hannah caught sight of herself in the tinted window. Her blue eyes looked almost luminous in the streetlights, and for the first time in her life, she wondered if they might actually be a gift instead of a curse. Jean Woo settled into the driver's seat and turned to her with a smile that made her pulse quicken. Something told her that this chance encounter was about to change everything. "Where to?" he asked, and Hannah realized she was about to trust this mysterious man with more than just her safety. She was about to trust him with her heart. The restaurant Jean Woo brought her to was nothing like the casual Korean barbecue places Hannah usually frequented. Golden Dragon occupied an entire corner building in the heart of Koreatown, its entrance marked by elegant calligraphy and subtle luxury that whispered rather than shouted its expense. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, she could see pristine white tablecloths and servers moving with choreographed precision. Jean Woo guided her inside with a gentle hand at the small of her back, the touch sending unexpected warmth through her thin blouse. The hostess bowed deeply when she saw him, speaking in formal Korean that indicated both respect and familiarity. This was clearly his place, not just somewhere he dined. "Your usual table is ready, Mr. Park," she said, though Hannah noticed Jean Woo had given a different name in the car. As they walked through the dining room, other patrons looked up from their meals. Some nodded respectfully, others simply watched with the careful attention of people who recognized power when they saw it. Hannah felt exposed under their gazes, acutely aware that she didn't belong in this world of expensive suits and designer handbags. Jean Woo seemed to sense her discomfort. "You are with me," he said quietly as they reached a private booth in the back corner. "That means you belong here." The booth offered a perfect view of both the entrance and the kitchen, Hannah noticed. A strategic position for someone who needed to watch for threats. The realization sent a small chill down her spine even as she appreciated the warm leather seats and the way the alcove created intimate privacy. A server appeared immediately with tea and small dishes of banchan, the array of side dishes that accompanied Korean meals. Jean Woo ordered for them both in rapid Korean, choosing dishes she had never tried despite her cultural heritage. Her father had been too busy working to teach her about fine Korean cuisine, and her American mother had known nothing about it. "Tell me about yourself." Hannah Kim with the remarkable eyes, Jean Woo said once they were alone. What do you do when you are not witnessing things you should not see? I translate documents mostly, she replied, watching his hands as he poured tea for them both. Legal contracts, immigration papers, business deals. I help Korean families navigate American systems. Important work, Jin-woo said, and his tone suggested he meant it. Language barriers can trap people in bad situations. Hannah found herself relaxing despite the surreal circumstances. Something about his attention made her feel valued in a way she rarely experienced. He listened to her answers with genuine interest, asked follow-up questions about her work, nodded thoughtfully when she mentioned the challenges her clients faced. The food arrived in waves of perfectly presented dishes. Bulgogi so tender it fell apart at the touch of chopsticks, japchae noodles glistening with sesame oil, kimchi aged to perfect sourness. Everything tasted better than any Korean food she had eaten before. This is incredible, she said between bites. Do you own this restaurant? Among other businesses, Jin-woo replied with a slight smile. I believe in supporting the Korean community in Los Angeles. Sometimes that means providing employment. Sometimes it means providing protection. The word protection carried weight that made Hannah look up from her meal. Jin-woo was watching her carefully, gauging her reaction to his subtle revelation. What kind of protection? She asked, though part of her already suspected the answer. The kind that ensures families can run their businesses without interference from people who would take advantage of them, Jin-woo said. The kind that makes sure young women can walk home safely at night. You are talking about organized crime, Hannah said quietly, surprised by her own directness. I am talking about community, Jin-woo replied. The police do not always understand Korean problems. The government does not always care about Korean families. Sometimes we must take care of ourselves. Hannah set down her chopsticks, processing this information. She had grown up hearing whispered stories about Korean gangs, but she had never expected to be sitting across from someone who might lead one. Jin-woo looked too refined, too educated, too genuinely kind to fit her mental image of a criminal. As if reading her thoughts, Jin-woo leaned forward slightly. My father came to America with nothing, he said. He worked in factory jobs for 20 years, sent money home to Korea, saved every penny to bring my mother and sisters here. When he finally opened a small grocery store, local gangs demanded protection money. When he could not pay, they burned it down. Hannah felt her chest tighten at the pain that flickered across Jin-woo's features. She recognized the expression of someone who had watched a parent's dreams destroyed. I was 15, Jin-woo continued. I decided then that no one in our community would suffer like my father did. Not if I could prevent it. So you became what you fought against, Hannah said, then immediately regretted the harsh words. But Jin-woo did not look offended. Instead, he smiled sadly. Perhaps. But I also became what our community needed. Someone who could negotiate with the city in English. Someone who understood American law well enough to navigate it. Someone who could ensure that Korean families had advocates when the system failed them. Before Hannah could respond, Jin-woo's phone buzzed against the table. He glanced at it, and his expression shifted to something harder, more dangerous. Excuse me for a moment, he said, stepping away from the table to take the call. Hannah watched him through the restaurant window as he spoke rapidly in Korean. His body language was tense, controlled anger evident in the set of his shoulders. When he returned to the table, the gentle man who had been sharing his childhood trauma was replaced by someone who radiated quiet menace. Is everything all right? Hannah asked. There are some business complications, Jin-woo said carefully. Nothing that concerns you. But something in his tone suggested it might concern her very much. Before she could ask more questions, 3 men approached their table. All were well-dressed. All moved with the same controlled grace she was beginning to associate with Jin-woo's world. The oldest of the 3, a man in his 50s with silver threading through his black hair, bowed slightly to Jin-woo before switching his gaze to Hannah. His eyes widened when he saw her face. Are these the blue eyes everyone is talking about? He asked in Korean. Jin-woo nodded. Hannah, may I introduce my uncle, Min-jae? Uncle, this is Hannah Kim. Min-jae continued to stare at her with undisguised fascination. In our family, we have heard stories about people like you, he said. My grandmother used to say that blue-eyed children born to Korean mothers were touched by mountain spirits, blessed with the ability to see fortune before it arrives. Hannah felt heat rise in her cheeks under his intense scrutiny. Those are just superstitions, she said. Perhaps, Min Jae replied. But we have had nothing but bad luck for months. Territory disputes, failed negotiations, police investigations. And tonight, for the first time in weeks, we received good news. A rival gang has agreed to a truce meeting. Our stolen shipment has been recovered. A corrupt city official has decided to cooperate instead of demanding bribes. The timing is coincidental, Hannah protested. In our business, there are no coincidences, Min Jae said firmly. Only patterns that reveal themselves to those wise enough to see them. Jin Woo placed a gentle hand on Hannah's arm. My uncle believes that your presence tonight has changed our fortune, he explained. In Korean culture, some people are considered chongun, lucky charms, bringers of good fortune to those around them. That is ridiculous, Hannah said. But even as she spoke the words, she remembered all the times good things had happened to people after she spent time with them. Jobs offered after she translated their applications. Business deals that succeeded after she helped with negotiations. Immigration cases that were approved after she filled out the paperwork. The other two men approached, and Min Jae introduced them as Dong-soo and Hyunwoo. Both looked at her with the same mixture of respect and curiosity that was starting to make her deeply uncomfortable. We should call her Chongun Nuna, Dong-soo said with a grin. Lucky charm big sister. Hannah found herself smiling despite her unease. The Korean honorific for older sister felt warm and welcoming, a sense of belonging she had rarely experienced. But Jin Woo's expression remained serious. There is something else you need to know, he said to Hannah. The complications I mentioned earlier involve a rival organization, Japanese Yakuza, who have been expanding into Korean territory. Min Jae nodded grimly. They know we have been struggling lately. Tonight's success will anger them. They may escalate their pressure. What does that have to do with me? Hannah asked, though she suspected she already knew. If they believe you are responsible for our changed fortune, Jin Woo said carefully, they may see you as a target worth eliminating. The restaurant suddenly felt colder despite the warm lighting and excellent food. Hannah looked around at the faces of these men who had welcomed her as family, and realized that her chance encounter in an alley had pulled her into a world far more dangerous than she had imagined. I should go home, she said quietly. That may not be safe anymore, Jin Woo replied. If the Yakuza have decided you are connected to us, your apartment is the first place they will look. So what are you suggesting? Hannah asked, though her heart was already racing with the implications. Jin Woo met her eyes with an expression that was both protective and apologetic. Stay with me tonight. Let me ensure your safety while we figure out the extent of the threat. And if I refuse, then I will have my men watch your building. But I cannot guarantee it will be enough, Jin Woo said honestly. These people do not hesitate to hurt innocents to make their point. Hannah closed her eyes, trying to process how quickly her simple life had become complicated. When she opened them again, Jin Woo was watching her with patience and concern that felt genuine. If I agree to this, what exactly am I agreeing to? She asked. Protection, Jin Woo said simply. Nothing more, nothing less. You have my word that you will be safe and respected. Min Jae leaned forward. And perhaps, if the stories are true, you will bring us the luck we need to end this conflict peacefully. Hannah looked at these men who had just made her feel more valued and welcomed than most people in her entire life. The rational part of her mind screamed that this was insane, that she should call the police and try to return to her normal life. But the larger part of her, the part that had always felt like an outsider looking in, whispered that maybe this was exactly where she belonged. All right, she said finally, but I want to understand exactly what I am getting involved in. Jin Woo smiled, and for the first time since she had met him, he looked genuinely relieved. I will tell you everything you want to know, he promised. Starting with why your blue eyes may be the key to saving both our organizations from a war that no one wants to fight. Jin Woo's penthouse occupied the top 2 floors of a glass and steel tower in downtown Los Angeles, the kind of address that commanded respect and suggested serious wealth. As the private elevator opened directly into his foyer, Hannah felt the same disorientation she had experienced at the restaurant. This was not her world, and everything from the marble floors to the museum-quality art on the walls reminded her of that fact. The space was masculine but not cold, decorated in deep blues and charcoal grays with touches of traditional Korean elements that spoke to cultural pride without being ostentatious. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the city lights stretching to the ocean, and Hannah found herself drawn to the vista despite her nervousness. "Your home is beautiful," she said, meaning it despite her discomfort. "It will be your home for as long as you need it to be," Jin-woo replied, setting down a leather bag she had not noticed him carrying. "I had one of my men retrieve some of your belongings from your apartment while we were at dinner." Hannah turned to stare at him. "You had someone break into my apartment?" "Not break in," Jin-woo said with a slight smile. "You gave me your address, remember? And your landlord was very cooperative when my associate explained that you were staying with friends for a while." The casual way he had handled what should have been a major violation of her privacy was both impressive and unsettling. This was clearly how his world operated. Problems were solved efficiently, without asking permission or following normal social conventions. "There is a guest suite on the second floor," Jin-woo continued, leading her toward a curved staircase. "Private bathroom, walk-in closet, your own sitting area. You will have complete privacy." "And if I want to leave?" Hannah asked, testing the boundaries of her situation. "The front door is not locked from the inside," Jin-woo said seriously. "You are my guest, not my prisoner. But I hope you will allow me to convince you that staying is in your best interest." Hannah nodded, accepting the compromise for now. The guest suite was larger than her entire studio apartment, decorated in soft creams and pale golds that felt unmistakably feminine. Someone had clearly put thought into making the space welcoming for a woman. "My assistant decorated this room last year," Jin-woo explained when he caught her surprised expression. "I occasionally have female business associates who require accommodation." Something about the way he said it suggested that those business associates had never been anything more professional, and Hannah felt oddly relieved by that realization. "There are clothes in the closet that should fit you," Jin-woo continued. "If you need anything else, there is a phone by the bed that connects directly to my office." After he left her alone, Hannah explored the space that was temporarily hers. The closet did indeed contain clothing in her size, expensive casual wear and sleepwear that still had tags attached. Someone had been very thorough in their preparations. She changed into silk pajamas that felt like luxury against her skin and tried to process the surreal turn her life had taken in less than 6 hours. This morning, she had been Hannah Kim, struggling translator who barely made rent. Tonight, she was apparently a lucky charm being protected by one of the most powerful men in Koreatown. Sleep came fitfully, interrupted by dreams of blue eyes and dangerous men in expensive suits. When she woke to the smell of cooking food and quiet conversation in Korean, it took her several moments to remember where she was. Sunlight streamed through the massive windows of her suite, and the clock on the nightstand read 9:30. She had slept later than usual, probably exhausted by the emotional upheaval of the previous evening. Hannah showered and dressed in dark jeans and a soft blue sweater from the mystery wardrobe, then followed the scent of food downstairs. Jin-woo stood in his spectacular kitchen, moving with easy competence as he prepared what looked like a traditional Korean breakfast. He had changed from his suit into dark jeans and a white button-down shirt with the sleeves rolled up, and the casual clothing somehow made him seem more approachable while still maintaining his air of controlled power. Hannah found herself staring at his forearms as he stirred something in a pot, noting the strength in his hands and wondering what those fingers might feel like against her skin. "Good morning," Jin-woo said without turning around, somehow sensing her presence. "I hope you slept well." "Better than expected," Hannah replied honestly. "What are you making?" "Juk," he said, ladling rice porridge into bowls. "My mother's recipe. She always said it was good for settling nervous stomachs and worried minds." "That sounds perfect," Hannah said, settling onto one of the stools at the kitchen island. "Do you cook often?" "My mother insisted I learn before she would let me live on my own," Jin-woo said with a smile that made him look younger. "She said that a man who could not feed himself properly could not take care of anyone else either." "Smart woman," Hannah said, accepting the bowl he placed in front of her. The porridge was perfect, creamy, and comforting, seasoned with just enough salt, and topped with green onions and a soft-cooked egg. It tasted like the kind of meal that healed both body and spirit. "This is wonderful," she said between bites. "Thank you for taking care of me." "It is my pleasure," Jin-woo replied, settling across from her with his own bowl. "How are you feeling about everything that happened last night?" "Like I fell through some kind of portal into someone else's life," Hannah said honestly. 6 months ago, the most dangerous thing in my world was a difficult translation deadline. Jin Woo's expression grew serious. I am sorry that you have been pulled into this situation. If there were another way to keep you safe, I would choose it. Before Hannah could respond, Jin Woo's phone rang. He glanced at the caller ID and his face darkened. I need to take this, he said, stepping away from the kitchen. Even from across the room, Hannah could hear the tension in his voice as he spoke rapidly in Korean. The conversation grew heated, and she caught enough words to understand that someone had been hurt, that boundaries had been crossed, that retaliation was being planned. When Jin Woo returned to the kitchen, the gentle man who had cooked her breakfast was gone, replaced by someone whose anger was barely controlled. What happened? Hannah asked, though part of her was afraid to know. Jin Woo sat heavily on his stool, running both hands through his hair. The Yakuza sent a message this morning. They attacked one of our businesses and left a note with your name on it. Hannah felt the blood drain from her face. My name? How do they even know who I am? Someone must have identified you from last night, Jin Woo said grimly. Word travels fast in our community, especially news as unusual as a blue-eyed Korean woman appearing at exactly the moment our luck changed. So now what happens? Hannah asked, surprised by how steady her voice sounded. Now I make some phone calls and ensure that every Yakuza member in Los Angeles understands that you are under my personal protection, Jin Woo said with quiet menace. And that anyone who threatens you will answer to me directly. The dangerous edge in his voice should have frightened her, but instead Hannah found herself feeling safer than she had in years. This man would protect her with his life if necessary, and that certainty was both thrilling and terrifying. Will that be enough to stop them? She asked. It will have to be, Jin Woo replied. The alternative is a war that will hurt innocent people in both our communities. They sat in comfortable silence for several minutes, both lost in thought. Hannah watched Jin Woo's face as he processed whatever strategies he was considering, noting the way his jaw tightened when he was thinking hard and the small scar above his left eyebrow that spoke of a violent past. Tell me about your childhood, she said suddenly, wanting to know more about the man beneath the dangerous exterior. Jin Woo looked surprised by the change of subject. What would you like to know? What you wanted to be when you grew up, Hannah said. Before all this became your responsibility. A teacher, Jin Woo said without hesitation. I wanted to teach Korean history at a university. Help Korean American children understand their heritage. That is beautiful, Hannah said softly. What changed your mind? My father was killed when I was 19, Jin Woo said simply. Shot by Yakuza members who wanted to expand into our territory. I inherited his responsibilities along with his enemies. Hannah reached across the island to touch his hand without thinking. The contact sent warmth up her arm, and she noticed that Jin Woo's breath caught slightly at the touch. I am sorry, she said. That must have been incredibly difficult. Some days I still wonder what my life would have looked like if I had been allowed to choose it myself, Jin Woo admitted. But then I think about the families I have been able to help, the businesses that stayed open because of our protection, the children who grew up safe because someone was watching out for them. You are still a teacher, Hannah said, just in a different way. Jin Woo turned his hand palm up beneath hers, threading their fingers together. The simple gesture felt incredibly intimate, and Hannah found herself studying his face with new appreciation. What about you? He asked. What did you want to be? A bridge, Hannah said without thinking, then laughed at how strange that sounded. I wanted to help people understand each other across cultural differences. Help them see that being different does not mean being wrong. It sounds like you achieved your dream, Jin Woo said. Only partially, Hannah replied. I help with language, but I have never really helped with understanding. Most people see my blue eyes and decide they already know everything they need to know about me. Their loss, Jin Woo said firmly. Anyone who cannot see past your eyes to the intelligent, kind, brave woman underneath does not deserve your time. Hannah felt heat rise in her cheeks at the sincerity in his voice. No one had ever described her as brave before, but sitting in this kitchen with this dangerous man, she was beginning to think he might be right. The moment was interrupted by the sound of the elevator opening. Jin Woo immediately positioned himself between Hannah and the entrance, his entire body language shifting to high alert. An elegant Korean woman in her 60s emerged from the elevator, moving with the kind of regal bearing that suggested she was accustomed to deference. Her hair was perfectly styled, her clothing expensive and conservative, and her sharp eyes missed nothing as they swept the penthouse. "Iyama," Jinwoo said, relaxing slightly. "I was not expecting you. I heard disturbing rumors about my son harboring a stranger," the woman replied in Korean. "I came to see for myself what kind of person has captured your attention so completely." Hannah stood slowly, recognizing the critical assessment happening and knowing her future might depend on this first impression. "Mother, this is Hannah Kim," Jinwoo said, switching to English out of courtesy. "Hannah, my mother, Mrs. Park Sunny." Mrs. Park approached with measured steps, studying Hannah's face with the intensity of someone evaluating a potential threat. When her gaze reached Hannah's eyes, she stopped short. "Blue eyes," she said in accented English. "I have not seen such eyes on a Korean face since I was a child in Busan." "Yes, ma'am," Hannah replied, bowing respectfully. "My grandmother told stories about children like you," Mrs. Park continued, circling Hannah slowly. "Said they brought change to families who welcomed them. Sometimes good change. Sometimes dangerous change. I hope I bring only good fortune to your family," Hannah said carefully. "We shall see," Mrs. Park replied. "My son tells me you are in danger because of your association with us." "It appears so, yes, ma'am. And yet you choose to stay here rather than disappear where these enemies cannot find you," Mrs. Park observed. "Why?" Hannah considered the question seriously. "Because running away has never solved any of my problems," she said finally. "And because your son makes me feel like I might actually belong somewhere for the first time in my life." Mrs. Park's expression softened slightly at this honest answer. She turned to Jinwoo and spoke rapidly in Korean, too fast for Hannah to follow completely. But she caught enough to understand that his mother was questioning his judgment while acknowledging that he seemed happier than she had seen him in years. "You will join us for dinner tomorrow night," Mrs. Park announced to Hannah. "I will cook traditional foods, and we will discuss your intentions regarding my son." "Mother," Jinwoo protested. "A man must eat, and a woman who wishes to understand a family must share their table," Mrs. Park replied firmly. "These are the old ways, and the old ways have served us well." After Mrs. Park left, Jinwoo turned to Hannah with an apologetic expression. "I am sorry about that. My mother can be quite direct." "I like her," Hannah said honestly. "She cares about you enough to check on potential threats to your well-being. That kind of love is precious." Jinwoo moved closer, close enough that Hannah could smell his cologne and feel the warmth radiating from his body. "You continue to surprise me," he said softly. "How so?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Most people are intimidated by my mother, and by my world in general. But you face everything with such grace, such strength. It makes me want to protect you and rely on you at the same time." The contradiction in his words made perfect sense to Hannah. She wanted to be strong enough to stand beside him and vulnerable enough to let him care for her. The balance felt impossible and necessary all at once. Jinwoo reached up to cup her cheek, his thumb stroking gently across her skin. For a moment, the dangerous world outside ceased to exist. There was only this kitchen, this man, and the possibility of something beautiful growing between them. Then his phone rang again, shattering the moment. Jinwoo closed his eyes in frustration before stepping away to answer. The brief conversation was terse and urgent. When it ended, Jinwoo's expression was grim. "What now?" Hannah asked. "The Yakuza have requested a meeting," he said. "Tomorrow night. They want to discuss terms for ending the conflict peacefully." "That sounds like good news," Hannah said hopefully. "In our world, when enemies ask for peace talks, it usually means they are planning something worse than war," Jinwoo replied. "But we have no choice but to attend and see what they want." As if summoned by the mention of danger, the sound of the elevator announced another arrival. This time it was Min Jae and two other men Hannah recognized from the restaurant, all looking serious and alert. "The meeting is set for tomorrow at 8, Min Jae reported without preamble. "Neutral territory." They specified that they want to see the blue-eyed woman for themselves. "Absolutely not," Jinwoo said immediately. "They made it a condition of the talks," Min Jae replied. "No woman, no meeting." "Then there will be no meeting," Jinwoo said with finality. Hannah looked between the men, understanding that her presence had become both a blessing and a complication for this organization that had welcomed her so warmly. The realization that she might be the key to peace or war was sobering. "What if I want to go?" she asked quietly. All four men turned to stare at her in surprise. "The danger is too great," Jinwoo said immediately. But if my being there could prevent violence, prevent people from being hurt, how can I refuse? Hannah replied. Is that not what family does for each other? Take risks to protect the people they care about? The word family hung in the air between them, and Hannah realized she meant it. These people had made her feel more valued and protected in 2 days than she had felt in years. If her strange blue eyes could help them find peace, she owed it to them to try. Jin Woo's expression was torn between admiration and terror. You are the bravest person I have ever met, he said finally, and the most stubborn. I learned from the best, Hannah replied with a small smile. As the men began planning security protocols for the meeting, Hannah felt the last pieces of her old life falling away. Tomorrow night, she would face the Yakuza as Jin Woo's partner, not his protected guest. The thought should have terrified her. Instead, standing in this kitchen surrounded by these dangerous men who had become her family, Hannah felt like she was finally exactly where she belonged. The call came at 6 in the morning, jarring Hannah from the first peaceful sleep she had experienced since arriving at Jin Woo's penthouse. Even from her suite upstairs, she could hear the urgency in his voice as he answered his phone, followed by rapid Korean too fast and angry for her to understand completely. When she made it downstairs, still in her silk pajamas with a robe thrown over them, Jin Woo was pacing his living room like a caged predator. His hair was disheveled, his usually perfect composure cracked by whatever news he had received. What happened? She asked, noting the way his hands clenched into fists at his sides. They took Junho, Jin Woo said without stopping his restless movement. My cousin. He was walking to his car after closing the restaurant last night, and they grabbed him. The Yakuza, Hannah said, understanding immediately. They left a message saying they want to discuss the terms of his release at tonight's meeting. Jin Woo continued, his voice tight, with controlled rage. Using family members to force compliance is beyond the boundaries of acceptable conflict. Hannah had never seen Jin Woo this agitated, and something about his vulnerability made her want to comfort him. Without thinking, she moved to intercept his pacing, placing her hands on his chest to stop his movement. We will get him back, she said firmly, surprised by her use of the word we. Jin Woo looked down at her, his dark eyes showing a mixture of gratitude and pain. Junho is like a younger brother to me. His father died in the same attack that killed mine. I promised to protect him. And you will, Hannah replied, maintaining eye contact. What do we know about where they might be holding him? Before Jin Woo could answer, Min Jae arrived with Dong-soo and 2 other men Hannah had not met before. They carried themselves with the same controlled alertness she was beginning to recognize in Jin Woo's inner circle. We intercepted some communications, Min Jae announced without preamble, setting a small digital recorder on the coffee table. Electronic surveillance picked up these conversations from the Yakuza compound early this morning. He pressed play and Japanese voices filled the room, speaking rapidly about logistics and timing. Hannah listened intently, her years of translation work helping her parse the unfamiliar language structure. Can anyone understand what they are saying? Jin Woo asked after the recording ended. Some of it, said the man Hannah had not met. I speak a little Japanese from my time in Tokyo. They mentioned the meeting tonight, and something about a warehouse. Hannah held up her hand, asking for silence as she replayed the conversation in her mind. Her linguistic training had taught her to identify patterns even in unfamiliar languages, and something about the rhythm and context clues was starting to make sense. Play it again, she said, but slower this time if possible. As the voices filled the room again, Hannah closed her eyes and let her mind work through the sounds. Japanese shared enough linguistic roots with Korean that she could begin to piece together meaning from familiar elements. They are not just talking about tonight's meeting, she said when the recording stopped. They mentioned a second location. Something about moving the package before the foreigners arrive. The package, Min Jae repeated. That could be Junho. Hannah nodded, her excitement building as the pieces came together. There was also something about a ship schedule and a departure time. Tomorrow morning at 6. Jin Woo stared at her with something approaching awe. You understood all that from one listening? Language patterns are similar across related cultures, Hannah explained, feeling heat rise in her cheeks at his intense attention. And context helps fill in gaps. If they are planning to move Junho before the meeting, it means they never intended to negotiate in good faith. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. The Yakuza were using the meeting as a distraction while they moved their hostage to a more secure location, possibly out of the country entirely. We need to find that warehouse, Jin-Woo said grimly. Tonight, while they are focused on the meeting preparations. I can help with that too, Hannah said, surprising herself with her boldness. If you can get me more recordings or written communications, I might be able to piece together the location. Absolutely not, Jin-Woo said immediately. I will not put you in more danger than you are already facing. But you need me, Hannah replied, standing her ground. How many of your men speak Japanese well enough to understand tactical planning? How many have experience translating coded communications? She has a point, Min-jae said reluctantly. And we are running out of time. Jin-Woo looked torn between his protective instincts and practical necessity. Finally, he nodded. But you stay here, in the penthouse, working from the communications we bring to you. No field work. Agreed, Hannah said, though part of her thrilled at being included in something so important. The next few hours passed in a blur of activity. Jin-Woo's men brought recordings, intercepted text messages, even photographs of written notes. Hannah spread everything across Jin-Woo's dining table and lost herself in the puzzle of deciphering enemy plans. Her breakthrough came when she realized that the Yakuza were using a mixture of Japanese and Korean street slang to obscure their meaning. Her unique position as someone fluent in both cultures allowed her to crack the code that had frustrated Jin-Woo's other translators. Here, she called out, Jin-Woo appearing at her side immediately. This message mentions a fish market warehouse in San Pedro, and this one gives a street address that matches the port district. Within 20 minutes, Jin-Woo's men had confirmed the location and begun planning a rescue operation. As they discussed tactics and timing, Hannah felt a surge of pride at contributing something meaningful to Junho's rescue. You are incredible, Jin-Woo said quietly, appearing at her elbow as the tactical planning continued around them. Without your help, we might never have found him in time. I am just glad I could help, Hannah replied, though his praise made her feel warm all over. When the rescue team returned 3 hours later with Junho safe but shaken, the entire organization erupted in celebration. The young man was unharmed physically, and he hugged Jin-Woo with the fierce gratitude of someone who had genuinely feared for his life. Nuna saved me, Junho said to Hannah, using the Korean term for older sister that made her heart squeeze with belonging. Without your translation work, they said I would have disappeared forever. The celebration moved to the restaurant, where tables were pushed together and food appeared as if by magic. Hannah found herself seated at Jin-Woo's right hand, treated with the same respect accorded to family matriarchs and trusted advisors. To our Chang'e Nuna, Min-jae announced, raising his glass of soju, who proved today that she brings more than luck to our family. She brings wisdom and courage. The toast was echoed around the table in Korean and English, and Hannah felt tears prick her eyes at the acceptance and admiration in every face. She had spent her entire life feeling like an outsider, and now she was surrounded by people who valued her mind, her skills, and her presence. Jin-Woo leaned close to her ear as the celebration continued around them. Dance with me, he said softly. Here? Hannah asked, surprised. Jin-Woo stood and offered his hand with a smile that made her pulse race. Tonight we celebrate family and family dances together. The space between the tables was small, but Jin-Woo pulled her against him with gentle confidence, one hand at her waist and the other cradling her fingers. There was no music except the ambient sounds of conversation and laughter, but somehow it felt perfect. Hannah had never considered herself a particularly graceful dancer, but Jin-Woo led with such skill that she found herself following his movements effortlessly. The rest of the room seemed to fade away until there was nothing but his warm hands, and the way he looked at her like she was the most precious thing in the world. Thank you, he said as they swayed together in the small space. For what? Hannah asked, acutely aware of how close their faces were. For saving my family, Jin-Woo replied. For proving that you belong here not because of superstition, but because of who you are. The intensity in his voice made Hannah's breath catch. She could feel the heat of his body through their clothes, could smell his cologne mixed with the faint scent of his skin. When his thumb stroked across her knuckles, she felt the touch all the way to her toes. Jin-Woo, she started to say, But whatever words she had planned died when she saw the way he was looking at her mouth. The moment stretched between them, full of possibility and want, and the recognition that they were crossing into territory that would change everything. Hannah found herself rising slightly on her toes, drawn by the gravity of his presence. Then Dongsu appeared at Jinwoo's shoulder, speaking urgently in Korean about security concerns and tactical adjustments. The spell broke, and Jinwoo stepped back reluctantly, his eyes promising that this conversation was not over. The drive back to the penthouse was charged with unspoken tension. Jinwoo's hand rested on her thigh as he drove, and every traffic light that forced them to stop felt like an opportunity for something that neither of them quite dared to initiate. Once they were back in the privacy of his home, the careful distance they had maintained all evening became impossible to sustain. Hannah turned to say goodnight, and found Jinwoo standing much closer than she expected, close enough that she could see the flecks of gold in his dark eyes. "I have been thinking about doing this all evening," he said softly, reaching up to cup her face in both hands. When Jinwoo kissed her, it was with the careful reverence of someone who had been wanting something for a very long time. His lips were warm and gentle, asking rather than demanding, and Hannah found herself melting against him with a soft sigh of surrender. The kiss deepened gradually, becoming more urgent as Hannah's hands found their way into his hair, and Jinwoo's arms circled her waist to pull her closer. She could taste the soju on his lips and feel the slight tremor in his hands that suggested he was holding himself in careful control. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard, and Hannah felt dizzy with want and affection. "I should not have done that," Jinwoo said, though his hands remained gentle on her face. "Why not?" Hannah asked, confused by his sudden hesitation. "Because now I want things I have no right to want," he replied honestly. "Because you deserve better than a life lived in shadows and constant danger." "What if I think you are worth the risk?" Hannah said, surprised by her own boldness. Jinwoo's expression grew pained. "You do not understand what you would be choosing. What loving me would cost you." "Then tell me," Hannah challenged. "Help me understand." Jinwoo was quiet for a long moment, his thumb stroking across her cheekbones as he seemed to wrestle with internal conflict. Finally, he spoke. "My world is not just dangerous, it is permanent," he said. "There is no retiring from what I do, no walking away when things get difficult. Anyone who loves me becomes a target for my enemies for the rest of their life." "And you think that should frighten me away?" Hannah asked. "I think you deserve the chance to choose with full information," Jinwoo replied. "I think you deserve someone who can offer you a normal life with normal problems." Hannah reached up to cover his hands with hers, holding his gaze with steady determination. "I have never had a normal life, Jinwoo. I have always been between worlds, always been different, always been alone. You are the first person who has made me feel like my differences are gifts instead of flaws." The vulnerability in her voice seemed to break something in Jinwoo's careful control. He kissed her again, deeper this time, with the hunger of someone who had been denying himself something essential. "Hannah," he murmured against her lips, "you have become so much more than luck to me. You have become necessary." The admission hung between them like a confession, and Hannah felt her heart race with the implications. This powerful, dangerous, incredible man needed her not for her blue eyes or cultural superstitions, but for herself. "Show me," she said softly, her hands moving to the buttons of his shirt. "Show me how necessary." Jinwoo's eyes darkened with desire, but his hands caught hers before she could continue undressing him. "Are you certain?" he asked. "Once we cross this line, there is no going back." "I have never been more certain of anything in my life," Hannah replied, and meant every word. When Jinwoo led her upstairs to his bedroom, Hannah felt like she was finally coming home to the life she had always been meant to live. Whatever dangers lay ahead, she would face them with this man who saw her as both precious and powerful. As if summoned by their happiness, Jinwoo's phone buzzed with an urgent message. The Yakuza had discovered their missing hostage and were demanding immediate retaliation. Hannah's old apartment building had been set on fire 20 minutes ago. The message was clear. There was no going back to her old life. From now on, her fate was tied to Jinwoo's, for better or worse. Looking at his worried face in the dim light of his bedroom, Hannah realized she would not have it any other way. Hannah woke to sunlight streaming through unfamiliar windows and the scent of Jinwoo's cologne on the pillow beside her. For a moment, she lay still, processing the events of the previous night, and the way her body felt different, claimed, cherished. The silk sheets against her bare skin reminded her of every tender touch, every whispered word of devotion that had passed between them in the darkness. Jin-woo emerged from what she assumed was his bathroom, already dressed in dark jeans and a white button-down shirt, his hair damp from a shower. When he saw her watching him, his entire expression softened into something so tender it made her chest ache. "Good morning, beautiful," he said, settling on the edge of the bed to stroke her hair back from her face. "Good morning," Hannah replied, surprised by how natural it felt to wake up in his bed, in his world, as if she had been doing it for years rather than hours. Jin-woo leaned down to kiss her forehead, then her lips, with the kind of reverent attention that made her feel precious beyond measure. "How are you feeling?" he asked against her mouth. "Perfect," Hannah said honestly. "Like I finally found where I belong." The smile that crossed Jin-woo's features was radiant, transforming his usually serious face into something boyish and unguarded. "You belong with me," he said with quiet conviction. "Always." As if to prove his point, he gathered her closer, and Hannah marveled at how perfectly she fit against his chest, how right it felt to be held by this dangerous, tender man who had become the center of her universe in just a few short days. "I love you," Jin-woo said suddenly, the words seeming to surprise him as much as they did her. "I know it is too soon. I know the circumstances are complicated, but I need you to know that what happened between us was not just physical attraction or convenience." Hannah felt tears prick her eyes at the vulnerability in his voice. "I love you too," she replied, reaching up to cup his face. "I think I started falling the moment you called my eyes a blessing instead of a curse." Jin-woo kissed her deeply then, pouring all his emotion into the connection, and Hannah thought she could happily spend the rest of her life in this bed, in his arms, letting the dangerous world outside cease to exist. But reality intruded, as it always did, in the form of Jin-woo's phone buzzing insistently against the nightstand. He ignored it for as long as possible, but when it rang for the third time, he reluctantly pulled away. "I am sorry," he said, genuine regret in his voice. "I need to take this." The conversation was brief but intense, conducted in rapid Korean that left Jin-woo's expression increasingly grim. When he hung up, the tender lover was gone, replaced by the strategic leader Hannah was learning to recognize. "What happened?" she asked, sitting up and pulling the sheet around herself. "Intelligence reports suggest the Yakuza are planning something much larger than we anticipated," Jin-woo said, running both hands through his hair in frustration. "Not just retaliation for Junho's rescue, but a coordinated assault on all Korean businesses in the area." "When?" Hannah asked, though she was afraid of the answer. "Tonight," Jin-woo replied. "While most of our men are positioned for what we thought was going to be a negotiation meeting. So it was all a distraction," Hannah said, pieces clicking together in her mind. "A very effective one," Jin-woo confirmed grimly. "They never intended to negotiate. They just wanted to divide our forces and catch us unprepared." Jin-woo stood and began pacing, his strategic mind clearly working through scenarios and contingencies. Hannah watched him, noting the tension in his shoulders and the way his hands clenched into fists when he was thinking particularly hard. "What can I do to help?" she asked. Jin-woo stopped pacing and turned to face her with an expression that looked pained. "You can let me arrange safe transport out of the city tonight, before this escalates beyond our ability to control it." Hannah stared at him in shock. "You want me to leave?" "I want you to be safe," Jin-woo said firmly. "This is going to be a war, Hannah. People are going to die. I cannot focus on protecting my family and my community if I am terrified that you will be caught in the crossfire." "So your solution is to send me away?" Hannah said, surprised by the hurt that laced her voice. "My solution is to ensure that the woman I love survives to build a life with me after this is over," Jin-woo replied, moving to sit beside her again. "Please, Hannah, I am begging you to be reasonable about this." "Reasonable," Hannah repeated, feeling anger beginning to override hurt. "Is it reasonable to abandon the people I care about when they need me most? Is it reasonable to run away from the family that finally accepted me?" "This is not about acceptance," Jin-woo said, his own voice rising slightly. "This is about keeping you alive." "And what if I do not want to be kept?" Hannah shot back, standing to face him despite her state of undress. What if I want to stay and fight for the life we are building together? Jin Woo's expression grew desperate. You do not understand what you are asking. This will not be some minor skirmish. This will be brutal and final, and there will be casualties on both sides. Then I understand perfectly, Hannah said with quiet determination. You are asking me to choose between my safety and my integrity, between protecting myself and protecting the people I love. I am asking you to choose life, Jin Woo said, reaching for her hands. And I am choosing the life that matters, Hannah replied, pulling away. I am choosing to stand with my family when they need me instead of hiding like a coward. The word coward hung between them like a slap, and Hannah immediately regretted her harsh tone. But she did not regret the sentiment behind it. Jin Woo was quiet for a long moment, studying her face with an expression she could not read. Finally, he spoke. You are the most stubborn woman I have ever met, he said, but there was admiration rather than anger in his voice. I learned from watching a very stubborn man refuse to let his enemies destroy his family, Hannah replied with a slight smile. Before Jin Woo could respond, his phone rang again. This conversation was longer and more complex, involving multiple voices and what sounded like tactical planning. When it ended, Jin Woo looked both relieved and concerned. There may be another option, he said. My uncle has been in contact with a neutral Chinese gang that controls territory between ours and the Yakuza. They are willing to mediate, but only if both sides can demonstrate good faith. What kind of good faith? Hannah asked. A face-to-face meeting with their leader. Someone from our side who can speak for the organization but is not directly involved in the violence, Jin Woo explained. Someone who can present our case for ending this conflict peacefully. Understanding dawned on Hannah immediately. You need a diplomat, she said. I need someone who understands both cultures, who can navigate complex negotiations, who can represent our family with honor and intelligence, Jin Woo said. But I also need someone I can trust completely. You need me, Hannah said simply. Jin Woo's expression was torn between pride and terror. You would be perfect for this role, he admitted. Your linguistic skills, your cultural background, your ability to see situations from multiple perspectives. But if something goes wrong, if the negotiations fail, or if this is some kind of trap, you would be in immediate danger. Then we make sure the negotiations do not fail, Hannah said with more confidence than she felt. 3 hours later, Hannah found herself in the back of a sleek black sedan, dressed in a navy blue suit that conveyed both professionalism and respect for traditional values. Jin Woo sat beside her, briefing her on the Chinese leader they were about to meet and the delicate balance of power that governed relationships between the various criminal organizations in Los Angeles. His name is Chun Wei, Jin Woo explained. He has controlled the Chinatown territory for over 20 years, and he values stability above profit. If you can convince him that continued conflict will hurt all our communities, he may be willing to pressure the Yakuza into genuine negotiations. And if I cannot convince him, Hannah asked, then we prepare for war, Jin Woo said grimly. The meeting took place in a private dining room above a dim sum restaurant, the kind of neutral territory that all parties could access without losing face. Chun Wei turned out to be a man in his 60s with intelligent eyes and the kind of stillness that suggested great personal power held in careful control. Mr. Chun, thank you for agreeing to see us, Hannah began in Mandarin, grateful for the language classes she had taken in college. Chun Wei raised an eyebrow at her fluent pronunciation. You are the blue-eyed woman causing so much trouble in our neighborhood, he said with what might have been amusement. I am the woman trying to prevent unnecessary bloodshed, Hannah replied respectfully. The Yakuza attacks have already displaced innocent families and damaged legitimate businesses. Continued escalation will hurt everyone's interests. What makes you think this old man cares about Korean problems? Chun Wei asked, though his tone suggested he was testing her rather than dismissing her. Because you are too wise to believe that violence stays contained within ethnic boundaries, Hannah said. Because you know that gang wars bring police attention that hurts all our communities. And because you have built your reputation on being a man who values honor and stability. Chun Wei was quiet for several minutes, studying Hannah with the intensity of someone evaluating both her words and her character. Finally, he smiled. You speak with wisdom beyond your years, young woman, he said. And you argue your case with passion but not desperation. This suggests you believe what you are saying rather than simply trying to save your own people. I believe that peace serves everyone better than war, Hannah replied honestly. I believe that our communities are stronger when we work together rather than destroy each other. The negotiation lasted 2 hours, with Chun-Wei testing Hannah's knowledge of territorial boundaries, business relationships, and the complex web of alliances that governed criminal enterprises in the city. By the end, he had agreed to contact the Yakuza leadership and propose a genuine ceasefire meeting on neutral ground. You have done something remarkable here, Chun-Wei told Hannah as they prepared to leave. In 40 years of managing conflicts between organizations, I have rarely seen someone argue for peace with such effectiveness. As they drove back to Jean Wu's penthouse, Hannah felt a surge of pride at having successfully negotiated something so important. But more than that, she felt the deep satisfaction of finally using all her skills, her languages, her cultural understanding, her ability to bridge differences, for something that truly mattered. Jean Wu had been unusually quiet during the drive, but when they reached his building, he pulled her into his arms with fierce gratitude. You were incredible in there, he said against her hair. Watching you represent our family with such intelligence and grace made me fall in love with you all over again. The kiss that followed was desperate with relief and pride, and the kind of deep affection that comes from seeing someone you love prove themselves extraordinary. Hannah melted against him, thinking that this was what partnership felt like, two people making each other stronger and braver than they could be alone. They were still kissing in the elevator when it opened directly into Jean Wu's penthouse. The romantic moment shattered immediately when they saw Min Jae waiting in the living room, his expression grim. The Yakuza rejected Chun-Wei's proposal, he reported without preamble. They said any woman who interferes in men's business deserves whatever happens to her. Jean Wu's entire body went rigid with protective rage. How did they respond so quickly, he asked. Because they have been watching the building, Min Jae replied. They know she was at the meeting. They know she succeeded in convincing Chun-Wei to help us. The implications hit Hannah like a physical blow. By successfully negotiating for peace, she had made herself a primary target for Yakuza retaliation. How long do we have? Jean Wu asked, his voice deadly calm. They are already moving into position, Min Jae said. The building is surrounded. As if summoned by his words, the lights in the penthouse went out, plunging them into darkness. Emergency lighting flickered on, casting eerie shadows across the elegant space that had become their sanctuary. Jean Wu pulled Hannah against his chest, his arms forming a protective barrier around her. Whatever happens now, he said quietly, we face it together. Looking up into his determined face, Hannah felt fear and love and fierce determination war in her chest. She had chosen this dangerous world, this incredible man, and these people who had become her family. Now she would prove that she was strong enough to fight for all of it. The final battle was about to begin, and Hannah Kim was exactly where she belonged, standing beside the man she loved, ready to defend the life they were building together. The emergency lighting cast harsh shadows across Jean Wu's penthouse as Min Jae coordinated defensive positions through his radio headset. Hannah could hear movement in the stairwells, the subtle sounds of trained men positioning themselves for combat, and her heart raced with the reality that she was about to experience her first genuine firefight. Jean Wu moved with calm efficiency, checking weapons and communicating with his security team through hand signals that spoke of years of preparation for exactly this scenario. But when he looked at Hannah, she saw the fear he was trying to hide behind tactical planning. The communications center is in my office, he said, leading her toward a room she had never seen before. Multiple screens showed feeds from cameras throughout the building and surrounding streets, and radio equipment lined one wall like something from a spy movie. From here, you can coordinate with our teams and monitor Yakuza movements, Jean Wu continued, showing her the radio controls. But if they breach our defenses, I need you to promise me you will use the emergency escape route. Hannah looked at the tunnel entrance hidden behind a bookshelf and shook her head firmly. I am not leaving you to face this alone. Then help me end it, Jean Wu said, pulling her into his arms for what might be their last kiss. Use those negotiation skills to find a way out of this that does not require bloodshed. Before Hannah could ask what he meant, the first gunshots echoed through the building. Jean Wu kissed her forehead once, whispered that he loved her, and disappeared into the tactical chaos that had erupted outside his office. Hannah settled at the communications console, her hands shaking slightly as she adjusted frequencies and tried to make sense of the multiple conversations crackling through the speakers. Jin Woo's voice was calm and authoritative as he directed his men's movements, but she could hear the tension underneath his professional composure. East stairwell is compromised, someone reported. They are advancing to the 15th floor. Fall back to secondary positions, Jin Woo responded immediately. Do not let them reach the residential floors. Through the security cameras, Hannah watched figures in dark clothing moving through the building with military precision. The Yakuza had clearly planned this assault carefully, and they had brought enough manpower to overwhelm Jin Woo's defenses through sheer numbers. As the battle raged floor by floor, Hannah found herself thinking about Chun Wei's words about wisdom and honor. The Yakuza were fighting like this was personal rather than business, which suggested they were motivated by pride rather than practical concerns. Pride could be negotiated with, if approached correctly. Jin Woo, can you hear me? She called through the radio system. His response came immediately, slightly breathless but still controlled. I am here. Are you safe? For now, Hannah replied. But I have an idea. Can you patch me through to the Yakuza communication frequency? Absolutely not, Jin Woo said immediately. I will not let you make yourself a target by communicating directly with them. I am already a target, Hannah pointed out. They came here specifically because of me. Let me use that to our advantage. There was a long pause filled with the sound of gunfire and shouted orders. Finally, Jin Woo's voice returned, reluctant but resigned. Frequency 12. 7, he said. But the moment this goes wrong, you disconnect and head for the escape route. Hannah switched to the Yakuza frequency, her heart pounding as she heard unfamiliar Japanese voices coordinating their assault. She took a deep breath and spoke clearly in Japanese. This is Hannah Kim, the woman you came here to find. I want to speak with your leader. The frequency went silent for several seconds before a new voice responded, older and more authoritative than the tactical chatter she had been monitoring. You have caused considerable trouble for a half-breed translator, the voice said in heavily accented English. I have prevented unnecessary bloodshed, Hannah replied, switching back to Japanese to demonstrate her linguistic capabilities. And I can continue to do so if you are wise enough to listen. You think your blue eyes make you special, the leader continued. You think Korean superstition gives you power over grown men. I think continued fighting serves no one's interests, Hannah said firmly. Your organization loses money and men. Our organization loses the same. The Chinese stay neutral and profit while we destroy each other. The only winners in this conflict are people who want both our communities to fail. The radio was quiet except for the continued sounds of battle in the background. Hannah could see through the security monitors that the fighting had reached the 20th floor, getting dangerously close to Jin Woo's penthouse. What do you propose, half-breed? The Yakuza leader finally asked. Direct negotiation between leaders, Hannah replied. You and Jin Woo, face-to-face, in the penthouse. One conversation to determine whether this ends tonight in peace or escalates to a war that destroys both your legacies. And why would I agree to put myself in the enemy's stronghold? The leader asked. Because you are already in the building, and because continuing to fight floor by floor will cost you more men than you can afford to lose, Hannah said. And because I give you my word as a bridge between cultures that you will be allowed to leave safely if negotiations fail. Your word means nothing to me, the leader said, but there was less hostility in his tone. Then let it mean something to Chun Wei, who has already agreed to guarantee safe passage for peace talks, Hannah replied, hoping desperately that her bluff would work. Another long silence, punctuated by radio chatter about casualties and ammunition supplies running low. Finally, the Yakuza leader spoke again. 5 minutes, he said. Your lover and I will talk for 5 minutes. If I am not satisfied, we finish this with blood. Hannah immediately switched back to Jin Woo's frequency. Did you hear that? She asked. Every word, Jin Woo replied, and she could hear both admiration and terror in his voice. You just negotiated the impossible. The next 5 minutes felt like hours. Hannah watched through security cameras as the Yakuza leader, a man in his 70s with white hair and traditional tattoos visible on his hands, made his way through the building. Jin Woo's men allowed him passage, weapons lowered but ready. creating a corridor of tense neutrality. When the elevator opened into the penthouse, Hannah emerged from the communications room to witness history being made. The two leaders faced each other across Jin Woo's living room, both armed, both surrounded by the evidence of the battle that had been raging around them. "Yamamoto-san," Jin Woo said with a respectful bow. "Park, Jin Woo," the older man replied, returning the gesture with equal formality. "Your woman speaks well for someone with no authority," Yamamoto said, glancing at Hannah with calculating eyes. "She speaks with my authority," Jin Woo replied firmly, "and with the wisdom to see solutions that pride makes us blind to." For the next 10 minutes, Hannah watched two powerful men negotiate the end of a war with the kind of respectful directness that only came from mutual understanding of strength. The terms they agreed upon were simple. Territory boundaries would be respected, business disputes would be handled through neutral mediators like Chen Wei, and families would be considered off-limits for retaliation. But it was Hannah who suggested the final term that sealed the agreement. "There should be cultural exchange," she said, surprising both men with her interruption. "Joint community events, business partnerships, shared resources for immigrant families who need legal help or language services. Turn this conflict into cooperation that benefits everyone." Yamamoto studied her for a long moment before nodding slowly. "The half-breed has more wisdom than most full-blooded leaders," he said. "Perhaps her blue eyes do bring luck after all." 3 weeks later, Hannah stood in the same penthouse, but this time it was filled with flowers, traditional Korean decorations, and the warm sounds of celebration rather than gunfire. Mrs. Park had outdone herself planning what she called a proper engagement ceremony, blending Korean traditions with touches that honored Hannah's mixed heritage. Jin Woo emerged from his bedroom wearing a traditional hanbok in deep blue and silver, looking so handsome that Hannah felt her breath catch in her throat. When he saw her in her own hanbok, a stunning creation in white silk with blue embroidery that perfectly matched her eyes, his expression grew soft with wonder. "You look like a dream," he said, taking her hands in his. The ceremony itself was small but perfect, with Min Jae serving as the formal presenter and Mrs. Park tearfully welcoming Hannah as her daughter. When Jin Woo slipped the engagement ring onto her finger, a sapphire surrounded by diamonds that caught the light like captured sky, Hannah felt the last pieces of her old loneliness fall away. "To the woman who brought peace to our family and our community," Min Jae announced as he raised his glass of ceremonial wine. "To our Chang'e Nuna, who proved that luck is what happens when wisdom meets courage." The toast was echoed by everyone present, including several Yakuza representatives who had come to honor the new alliance. Chen Wei had sent an elaborate gift and a note praising Hannah's diplomatic skills, and even Yamamoto had contributed a traditional Japanese vase as a symbol of respect. But it was Junho's speech that made Hannah cry happy tears. "Before Nuna came to us, we were a family divided by old fears and newer threats," he said in his careful English. "She showed us that being different is not a weakness. She showed us that love can be stronger than hatred. She showed us that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is choose to see the best in people instead of the worst." Later that evening, as the celebration wound down and the guests departed, Jin Woo pulled Hannah onto the terrace overlooking the city lights. The same view that had intimidated her weeks ago now felt like home, a symbol of the life they were building together. "No regrets?" Jin Woo asked, pulling her close against the cool night air. "Only one," Hannah replied, smiling up at him. "That it took us so long to find each other." When Jin Woo kissed her under the stars, Hannah thought about all the times people had mocked her blue eyes, all the years she had felt like an outsider in every space she entered. Now those same eyes were considered a blessing, a symbol of the bridge between cultures that she had become. "I have something else for you," Jin Woo said, reaching into his jacket pocket. "Another gift?" Hannah asked, laughing. "You have already given me more than I ever dreamed of having." "Not a gift," Jin Woo said seriously. "A proposition. I want to offer you a formal position as cultural liaison for our organization. Help other mixed heritage families find their place in our community. Use your language skills and diplomatic experience to prevent conflicts before they start." The position came with its own office, a substantial salary, and the kind of respect that Hannah had never imagined receiving. More importantly, it was work that mattered, Work that used all her skills and experiences to help other people find belonging the way she had. Partners in life and business, she said, remembering his words from their first night together. Always, Jean Wu replied, sealing the promise with another kiss. 6 months later, Hannah stood in the doorway of her new cultural center, watching children play in the courtyard while their parents attended English classes and immigration workshops. The center occupied a beautiful building in the heart of Koreatown, funded by the alliance between the Korean and Japanese organizations and supported by Chun Wei's Chinese community. Her hand rested on the gentle curve of her belly, where their first child was growing strong and healthy. The baby would be born with Jean Wu's dark hair and strong features, but the doctors had confirmed that he or she would inherit Hannah's distinctive blue eyes. Mrs. Park had cried with joy at the news, declaring that their grandchild would be doubly blessed with both Korean strength and blue-eyed fortune. The entire extended family had embraced the pregnancy as a symbol of hope and renewal, proof that love could create something beautiful from the most unlikely circumstances. Jean Wu appeared beside her, as he often did during his afternoon visits to the center. His arms came around her from behind, one hand joining hers on their growing child. "How are you feeling?" he asked, his lips brushing against her ear. "Happy," Hannah replied honestly. "Complete." Through the window, she could see Korean grandmothers teaching origami to Japanese children, while teenagers from both communities worked together on a mural celebrating cultural diversity. The sight filled her with deep satisfaction, knowing that her work here was preventing the kind of misunderstanding and conflict that had once threatened to destroy everything she loved. "I have been thinking," Jean Wu said as they watched the peaceful scene together. "When our children are old enough to ask, how will we tell them the story of how we met?" Hannah laughed, imagining trying to explain gun battles and gang negotiations to their blue-eyed babies. "We will tell them that sometimes the most beautiful things grow from the most dangerous soil," she said. "We will tell them that being different is not something to hide from, but something to celebrate. And we will tell them that love is worth fighting for," Jean Wu added, his arms tightening around her protectively. Looking out at the community they had helped build, at the children playing together despite their different backgrounds, at the future they were creating for their own family, Hannah knew that her blue eyes had finally brought her exactly where she was meant to be. "This is a question that touches my heart deeply, because I know so many of you watching have felt like outsiders in your own communities, caught between cultures or judged for being different. Have you found your place where being unique is celebrated rather than criticized? I would love to hear about the communities that have embraced you for exactly who you are." The Cultural Center thrived, becoming a model for community cooperation that attracted visitors from around the world. Hannah's diplomatic work expanded beyond Los Angeles, helping to establish similar programs in other cities where immigrant communities struggled with integration and interethnic tensions. 2 years after their engagement, on a perfect spring morning, Hannah and Jean Wu stood before their entire extended family in a traditional Korean wedding ceremony held in the same penthouse where they had first declared their love. Mrs. Park had insisted on every traditional element, from the wooden ducks symbolizing lifelong fidelity to the sharing of dates and chestnuts representing fertility and prosperity. But it was the moment when their toddler daughter, Elena Jean Park, tottered between them on unsteady legs that made the ceremony truly perfect. The little girl had inherited her father's determination and her mother's distinctive blue eyes, and she was already showing signs of the linguistic abilities that would allow her to bridge cultures the way her mother did. As Elena reached for both parents simultaneously, her blue eyes bright with joy and mischief, the assembled crowd erupted in laughter and applause. Here was the future they had all fought for, a child who would grow up knowing she belonged everywhere because she was loved completely. When the formal ceremonies ended and the celebration moved into full swing, Hannah found herself surrounded by women from 3 different cultures, all eager to share advice about marriage and motherhood. Mrs. Park beamed with pride as she introduced her daughter-in-law to distant relatives, and even some of the Yakuza wives had come to offer their respects and friendship. "You did it," Chun Wei said as he approached with his own grandchildren in tow. "You turned enemies into family." "We all did it," Hannah corrected gently, "by choosing to see possibilities instead of just problems." 5 years later, the Cultural Center had expanded to include 3 buildings and served over 2,000 families annually. Hannah's second child, a son named David, had his father's dark eyes but her gift for languages, speaking fluent Korean, English, Japanese, and Mandarin by his 4th birthday. On a warm September afternoon, as Hannah watched Elena help teach origami to newer immigrant children while David played with toddlers from a dozen different countries, she felt the deep contentment that came from a life well lived. Jin-woo found her there as he always did, his arms coming around her with the familiar comfort of a love that had only grown stronger through the years. Their third child was due in the winter, and they had already chosen the name, Hope, for the gift she had brought to their entire community. "Do you remember what you told me on our first night together?" Hannah asked as they watched their children playing with friends from every background imaginable. "That your eyes were a blessing," Jin-woo replied immediately. "And now look," Hannah said, gesturing toward their daughter, who was patiently helping a shy Japanese boy fold paper cranes while explaining the process in 3 languages. Her blue eyes had indeed been a blessing, but not in the way ancient superstitions had predicted. They had brought luck not through magic, but through the courage to build bridges where others saw only walls. They had brought fortune not through supernatural intervention, but through the wisdom to choose love over fear, understanding over judgment, and community over conflict. As the sun set over Los Angeles, painting the sky in shades of hope and promise, Hannah Kim Park knew that she had finally found her place in the world, not as an outsider looking in, but as a bridge connecting all the places where love could grow. And her blue-eyed children would grow up knowing that being different was not a burden to bear, but a gift to share with the world.